Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm here today with Jack Cohen-Joppa. Jack and Felice Cohen-Joppa have been writing and publishing The Nuclear Resistor since the early 1980s. They realized that the vital issue of nuclear disarmament was bound to result in the imprisonment of many activists. They dreamed of a nationwide network of supporters who could quickly send letters of support to prisoners and letters of protest to the authorities. Jack and Felice continue to educate the public about nuclear weapons, conditions in prisons, and all the ways that we can work for justice. Jack, I was so glad to meet you when I was still in high school at the Kings Bay Plowshare 7 trial. And I was somewhat involved in supporting. I really love the Kings Bay Plowshare 7. And as I try to explain to people back home about the Kings Bay Plowshares action, I found out that many people had three main misconceptions in mind. The first misconception was nuclear weapons are made through harmless processes. Second, they are hidden away in completely inaccessible secret concrete bunkers super far away from people. And third, the only effect that they will ever have on us would be to protect the US if we are attacked. So would you mind reflecting on those misconceptions with me?
Yeah, because I think actually all three of them might be addressed sort of in one general response, which is that being the prevailing image that you ran into and the people that you spoke with signals that the nuclear industry has been successful in the framing of the nuclear issue and the nuclear debate about nuclear weapons. Because the desire of the nuclear industry is that it be something that's separated from us, that is handled by the experts, and that must be done in secret because it is, of course, national security. And don't mind us, don't think about it, don't dwell on it, but yes, remember, it is your ultimate protector. And it approaches almost a spiritual reliance upon nuclear weapons. And so they create an image of an unassailable nuclear priesthood, that this is the way. The reality is human beings are inevitably at conflict, and the only way to stave off that conflict is to threaten the extermination of the entire species. And that's where I lose it. And if people get that far to begin to look at the logic behind what they're proposing and what they're preparing for, then the charade is lost, and the reality of the nuclear state is exposed. So it's in the interest of the nuclear state to keep it out of sight and out of mind. But in reality, from the very beginning of the creation of nuclear weapons, beginning with the mining of uranium, it's done in public places. And it does have significant, profound impacts on our culture. There's a massive industrial base across the entire country and indeed around the world that supports the production of nuclear weapons. As I said, beginning with the mining of uranium and the refining of the uranium into the weapons grade that can be used for the weapons, and into everything else that's produced along the way, both the waste and other nuclear materials that are used for reactor fuel, for other purposes. And that all is out there in the open, and it has an environmental impact because you are dealing with radiation. And it's partly that's a mysterious area to a lot of us.
Yeah.
And it's in their interest to keep it mysterious, because then the people who control the industry control the narrative, because they fall back on the necessity of state secrets. The weapons that you are aware of now in Georgia, they're inside a military base, but they're loaded onto submarines at that base, and the submarines go out on patrol around the world. Managing that weapons inventory involves the transportation of weapons from the place where they're assembled in Texas to places where they are deployed from in military bases across the country that have Air Force weapons and that have Navy weapons. and they're part of the landscape.
Yeah.
So they are out there.
Mm-hmm.
Their manufacturer produces radioactive waste that has to be managed. Right now, a lot of the military waste, the waste that came from the production of plutonium for upwards of 60,000 nuclear weapons in the course of US history anyway, all of that military waste resides at the factories where it was produced, the factories where the bombs were manufactured, and some of it now at a repository in southeastern New Mexico, where they intend to bury it underground. That's a whole nother separate story from this one.
Yeah. That's like what I was struggling with, was telling people, these are out in the open, and these can be used at any minute, and they don't protect us. So thank you for reflecting on that with me, Jack. Yeah. And my second question is, how does the nuclear resistor make a difference in the lives of activists on the front lines who are serving time?
Well, it was our hope that it would serve to connect the activists who are in jail with the broader community on the outside that is supporting them by being involved in the same movement for a nuclear-free future. Maybe I could best answer that question just by reading a couple of little testimonials. Would that be okay?
Awesome.
Because we get them unsolicited. We have solicited occasionally, but we've gotten a lot of sort of unsolicited testimonials, and I'll read. Let me grab my glasses here.
Sure.
A Korean woman wrote, "All the 26 past and current prisoners opposing war-based construction in Jeju, South Korea, fully appreciate the nuclear resistor. Those who have regularly received its caring letters and newsletters can seldom forget how one newsletter dedicated to anti-war prisoners throughout the world can empower a single one in a lonely prison cell. Thanks to the nuclear resistor, the struggle of Jeju Island is understood in the same line of people's courageous march for peace around the world." And similarly, Robert Rabin, who's an activist in Vieques, Puerto Rico, which was a bombing target up until 1999, when the activity of the people of Puerto Rico, and particularly on Vieques, finally drove the Navy out of their testing range on Vieques Island. Robert wrote, "During my 6-month sentence, support from the nuclear resistor helped spread the word of the Vieques cause and bolster the spirit of our jailed civil disobedience." There were hundreds that went to jail in Vieques. Let's see. Frank Cordero wrote, he's a Catholic worker in Iowa.
Yeah.
He wrote, "Whenever I've been locked up, knowing that the nuclear resistor is out there letting people know where I am makes the lonely work of doing time a communal, worldwide experience. I don't mind doing the time, especially with the nuclear resistor out there connecting our small peace tribe to each person locked up at any given time." So it has had that effect for the activists that we were kind of imagining, is to help empower them by an awareness that they have supporters on the outside, and then indeed outside in the world, a lot of people are engaging in activity of a similar nature that puts themselves in confrontation with the state. And that's really what striving for nuclear abolition does, is it puts us in direct conflict with the nuclear state. I mean, Randolph Bourne said, "War is the health of the state." And certainly nuclear war is the health of, the modern imperial state that we live in. And to challenge nuclear weaponry inevitably involves challenging the very foundations of the nation state that we're in. So we got a little off track there, but I wanted to come back to the other point of the prisoners, because we've always had a policy to send the nuclear resistor for free to any prisoner who wants to receive it, regardless of whether they're like those that we're supporting in the pages.
Yeah.
Because we want to connect the notion of justice more broadly than just like the nuclear prisoners.
Yeah.
There are people who have like taken that risk in large part willingly, not always, in large part willingly, but experiencing the same situation with hundreds and thousands of other people. So we send it to people who want to receive it. And some of the most touching letters that we have received from these other prisoners are ones that express appreciation for being able to read about good people doing good things, because they haven't had much of that perhaps in their lives, and perhaps have lost faith in humanity. And it has given them a modicum of hope and inspiration to try to do a little bit more in their own reality. And we get a letter like that from a prisoner, every couple of years, that's more than just, cursory, hey, thanks for the newsletter, dudes.
Thank you, Jack. I'm so grateful for the work that both you and Felice do. It's beautiful and powerful, and thank you.
Well, we are very blessed to have found a niche.
Yes.
That seemed to be worth hanging out in. Yeah.
Awesome.
And that there are so many people of conscience around the world who engage in these actions. Yeah. That we have something to do with that information. That inspires us to keep going, is the fact that yes, it's happening.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I have one last question, Jack. This is my signature question on this channel.
Okay.
What does nonviolence mean to you?
What does nonviolence mean to you? Well, I grew up, kind of came of age in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I was imbued watching the news, being a current events kind of kid, by the civil rights struggle and by the movement against the Vietnam War. And I tried to kind of understand how the passion that drove people to act for racial justice and against the war drove some people to engage in violent activity, mm-hmm. and other people to specifically avoid and eschew violence. And in coming to read more and understand that, I also became exposed to anarchism, mm-hmm. as a political philosophy. And I learned that many proponents of nonviolence were also anarchists. And what connected them was what connected it for me, was the recognition that what humans find objectionable is coercion, being forced to do something that they don't want to do. It creates resentment. Mm-hmm. It builds towards, revenge and retaliation for, being humiliated by being forced to do things. And the coercion of people was part of what, made my understanding of the world was going on, was that people were rejecting that. And so we needed to look for ways that people can relate to each other that are voluntary, that are based on mutual aid, and that lift up each other rather than set us at odds that makes us think we need to dominate, suppress, eliminate others in our social context. And so seeing that, I got exposed then to people who had thought about nonviolence a lot more than I had, and began to understand that there's different ways of looking at it. For some people, nonviolence is a deep core life purpose, is to find an expression in life that embodies that non-oppression of others. For some people, nonviolence is simply an astute political tactic, a recognition of the fact that if you want to be effective, you organize, and generally you rise up in a nonviolent manner, and you make it impossible for the powers that be to continue having power over you. You exercise your independent power by joining with others. So that's a nonviolence as a tactic. So there are both these threads of nonviolence. I tend to look at by practicing nonviolence in the larger social sphere and applying the mechanics, which involve, like active listening and intervention and, obstruction with your being and with your words, that all of those is good exercise for their practice in our interpersonal sphere, in our families, and in our community relationships, so that the skills that we have to take out into the streets, we can bring home in our own personal relationships. And that's sort of the deeper level of nonviolence. And I'm more aspirational on that, because I recognize that I react in an unseemly human way sometimes.
Yeah.
You know? And I'd like to appeal to sort of the higher parts of my human condition. So, but I do think that the practice on the sort of the tactical nonviolence level can have an influence on the people who are engaging it to understand it on that deeper level. If you mean a spiritual level, if you mean a moral level, whatever, but something maybe just a little deeper than tactical, but as a way to look at organizing society.
Yeah. Thank you, Jack. That was so helpful to me, and it's been wonderful to sit here today with you and talk with you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the opportunity and invitation, Rosie. I wish you the best.